If you're like the majority of people I've talked to, you don't really have an incident response plan for ransomware. That means you'll be flying by the seat of your pants when you get hit. The good news is I have just the episode for you. It's an extremely popular episode from earlier this year where we talk with Melissa Palmer about what to put in your response plan and how to build it. It was so popular that it makes the perfect episode for our winter break. Even if you've heard it before, it's worth a second listen. If this is your first time listening to us, hi, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've dedicated my career of over 3 decades to helping those of you that have the job that I had when I first started, the backup person. This podcast is just for you. We turn backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me my super expensive vacation planner coordinator. How's it going, Prasanna?
I'm doing well, Curtis. How are things going? Are you excited? We're having technical difficulties. As you can tell, we're trying to keep this real, but yes, doing this for the fifth time, it's a little hard, but
I am excited. And my wife is starting to get excited. I started showing her some pictures a while ago, and she's been like downplaying it. Like she doesn't want to get excited. She wants to be sort of excited, but I needed her to prep for the vacation because we're going to the Maldives, which for those that don't know is a series of islands off the southern coast of India. And I'm on one of those islands, and it's a tiny island that literally we could walk from one end to the other in probably about 10 minutes. We're staying in one of those things over the water.
The villas over the
villas over the water. We have our own pool, and then right on the other side of the pool is the ocean. It's really cool.
Can I stow away in your luggage?
Yeah. It looks really cool. We're very excited. We're having a repeat guest, and we had her on a few weeks ago, and we got talking about ransomware, one of our favorite topics, and we got into this phase where it was like, you know what, that is a great conversation, but there's no way we could do it justice on that recording. So we said, hey, we're going to have her come back, and she's been in the industry for quite a while, and she's been specializing in she's done VMware. She's working. She's starting to specialize in security and ransomware. So and she is the author of the vmiss.net blog, and we are excited to have her on the podcast again, Melissa Palmer, aka VMiss.
Yes.
How's it going?
Thank you for having me back. It's going good.
I was surprised that you were like, "Oh, I'll come back on the podcast after."
I was like, "Yeah, of course I come back."
Well, thank you for being back.
It takes a lot more. You said it. I've been around this industry for a while. It takes a lot more than that to scare me away after all these years.
And Curtis, I think now might be a good time to put out our normal disclaimer.
Yeah, Prasanna and I work for different companies. He works for Zoom. I work for Druva. This is not a podcast of either company, and the opinions that you hear are ours. Also, be sure to rate us at ratethispodcast.com/restore. And if you want to join the conversation, reach out to me. By the way, I got to give a bunch of ways because I got some complaints and people say, well, I don't use Twitter anymore. So how do you give your Twitter address? So my LinkedIn is, linkedin.com/li/Mr. Backup. You can find me there. You can find me on Facebook. I'm on Facebook Messenger, but my email is W. Curtis Preston. My Facebook is W. Curtis Preston. I'm pretty easy to find if you're looking for me, and reach out to me, and we'll get you in on the conversation. Yeah, this thing of responding to a ransomware attack. This is something I've been spending a lot of time on lately.
Yeah,
because I'm working on writing my next book, which will be about responding to ransomware attacks. One of the things that you said in the pre-call was that if the first time you're thinking about responding to a ransomware attack is after you got a ransomware attack, it's not so good, right?
Not so
There's
good.
a lot of in fact, when I was looking at the sort of the outline that I've been working on for the book, most of the outline is the first half, right? Everything that you need to do before, right?
And that's it's like you can't just talk about ransomware recovery, right? Like it's a hard topic to talk about because you're like, there's all this other stuff, but if you haven't done it, guess what? You're not going to be able to recover. So we can't just talk about recovering. It doesn't work that way.
Right. It's sort of like I've made the joke a few times, probably on the pod, where I've said, listen, I've been in the backup industry, a long time. I've decided to give up backups and I'm just going to skip straight to restores, right? You can't really do that. Just like I've also said that if I'd have known how great grandkids were, I would have just gone straight to them. But not really possible.
It's not how it works.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good analogy, though. It really is.
Yeah, it is. It is. By the way, you want to know a little sad thing? So my granddaughter and her mother and her husband this is their last day in my house.
I was going to ask you about that.
They're living here for a while, and they're moving out tomorrow. So we'll sad moment. We'll sad moment.
Aww.
But anyway, so sorry to bring that down. So let's talk about what do you think, Melissa? Let's sort of go through those things that we really needed to have done before.
Well, let me try to set the stage a little bit. Like, does everybody remember like the disaster recovery tests like back in the day? You go to the colo, you got the checkboard, the board, you make the checkbox. Yep. Isn't like, I don't know, you play Doom for a while and eat some food. Someone restores a server, and it's like, well, Doom. It kind of worked, and we're good. That's how old I am. So, and then you're like, oh, it kind of worked. So we passed our DR test, but we can't actually recover, right? So what you need to do is actually do a ransomware recovery test where you actually recover everything. There's a novel concept. And when you do that, you're going to figure out all the stuff that you didn't do because it's not going to work or something's not going to whatever. But it's, talking from the backup lens, because I was at Veeam for quite some time, something I talked a lot about with Veeam customers was, trying to understand the whole recovery process. Because if I'm the backup admin and we get ransomware, I don't just go start restoring stuff all over. Like, that's not what happens. It's not like, oh, no, ransomware attack, let me start restoring servers. We'll be back online in 20 minutes. Like, it doesn't work that way. You have to figure out what happened before you can start restoring. You have to figure out what happened. You have to figure out if the threat actors are still around. You have to understand what was impacted. I have heard a lot of people say, oh, well, we treat ransomware different and we just recover in place. So we're good to go. And I'll go back to the little VMware. Yeah, I'll go back to the VMware ransomware thing. Well, if your VMware environment is ransomware, guess what? You're not recovering in place because there's nowhere to recover to. So it's understanding all those different things. You need to have some kind of understanding of what happened before you can recover. And that is generally driven by the incident response process, which is going to be driven by the security team. So again, if you haven't talked to the security team before ransomware has attacked you, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah. Or vice versa, if the security team hasn't talked to you about how backup integrates into that process.
Oh, that's really scary. That's really disturbing. That's actually really, even, I think that's scarier.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a combination, right? Well, yesterday, I think that was yesterday, we recorded a great podcast, by the way, with Tom from Gestalt IT. Networking nerd. Yeah. And we were talking a lot about the networking side of the response, right? Shutting down things, and using a combination of technologies, many of which are easier to use if you set them up front, right? Yeah. And talking about things like VLANs and like one of the things we talked about was having a VLAN for all of your desktops and laptops so that if you want to stop everybody from doing anything, you just shut off those VLANs and boom, instead of having to notify 5,000 users, hey, stop doing anything. You just shut off their network so they can't do anything. And then if stuff is still happening, well, it's not the users, right? Yeah. It's malware, right?
It's back to segmentation.
Kind of thing where, the network segmentation and the security part. I think, what role do you think I'll ask you what you think before I say what I think. So, what role do you think cyber insurance companies and then the companies that they can put you in touch with?
Cyber insurance is becoming more and more interesting because it gets to the point where they hand you the list of things you need to do before they'll issue your policy. And guess what? You're going to probably be able to cover anyway. But a big part of I've seen in a lot of policies lately is having basically an incident response firm on retainer ready to go as part of your policy. And I think that is invaluable. I think everybody should have some kind of relationship with an IR firm if you can't do it in-house. And even if you can, right, sometimes you do still need that outside perspective. I know a lot of larger orgs are like, no, we do our own IR. Well, you do your own IR, but you're not dealing with ransomware every day. And these people are. So you might want a little bit of help.
Yeah. I hate to do it, but another movie reference. I just saw the movie Plane, and the plane goes down in the middle of nowhere, and they brought in the guy. They brought in the incident response guy. Basically, once he showed up, right? See, there's a movie reference for everything.
I can't tell you the last movie I watched. I really can't. I don't even know.
I can pull up my app. Because I have the Regal Unlimited.
I can tell you the last thing I watched. I can't tell you the last movie I watched because I don't remember.
I saw like 3 this week. So in the theaters.
So back to the cyber insurance from movies.
We're talking about cyber insurance, incident response. Yeah. That's what we were talking about.
But I think. Well, this is one of the points that I remember because remember when Tony came on from SpectraLogic, Curtis, and he was like, oh my God, they got hit with ransomware. And he's like, just the previous month, they had signed up for cyber insurance. They had an IR firm come in, give them sort of the list of, hey, here's everything you need to do to help recover. Right. And he was like, that was probably the most valuable thing of that sort of cyber insurance policy was having the experts who could walk you through.
And it wasn't even like he was just lucky enough to have already, contracted with them, right? Yeah. But the best, I think, would be to, not that you would know this, but to do it not a month in advance, but obviously way in advance,
right?
and to give you some time to work with the incident response team and to make sure that you're doing the things that they want you to do.
That's like the problem, right? Like. It's not if, it's when, and you don't know when. It could be tomorrow. It could be next week. It could be next month. It could be next year. Like, you don't know.
It could have been 3 weeks ago.
And you just haven't realized it yet, right?
Yeah.
Do it today.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
That's my favorite.
Yeah. Which is why it doesn't matter when you invent a time machine.
I have bad news to you.
What?
I haven't invented a time machine. Because there are certain points I've always promised to myself. If I invented the time machine, I would go back to this point and tell myself I invented the time machine. And if that hasn't happened, I haven't invented it because time is not linear, right? So I haven't invented a time machine. I'm very upset about that.
Yeah, me neither. Well, this has been a weird. We've been jumping in and out of the topic here on this podcast, but. So,
incident response.
Yes.
Yeah. So we get the cyber insurance folks because I think in the initial ransomware phase, what people thought of cyber insurance was just a company to pay their ransom for you. And that they're definitely saying they're not interested in anymore.
Yeah. And there's more costs beyond the ransom, right? So you pay the ransom, but what about everything else? That's the thing. And policies have changed over time. Like, back in the day, a couple of years ago, right? Like before the pandemic, it was like easy to get cyber insurance. Like, oh yeah, I'll take a cyber insurance policy for $5 million, please, whatever. Now it's hard. And if you do actually use I've seen a lot of cases where if you actually use the insurance policy, guess what? They don't necessarily drop you, but guess what your deductible becomes? What they paid for your last ransomware attack, right?
Interesting.
So if I had to pay $2.5 million, guess what? I now have a $2.5 million deductible for my next attack. Because let's face it, we get IR in, right? We figured out what happened. We have to recover it. And then there's a whole stage where we have to do a post-mortem, figure out how they got in, if they're still in, and close up the gaps. That doesn't always happen because people are so like, oh, our VMs are back online. We're good to go. A happy day, happy day. And they get hit again because they never fixed the way they got in the first place.
What do you think about the idea of, and again, this would be driven by management. And, a lot of times, like you said, management isn't necessarily at that moment thinking about the best way to do something. They just want to do the fastest way to do something. Right. So another thing I've been looking into is the idea of, wouldn't the best practice to be to figure out how they got in before you do the recovery, before you turn everything back on?
Yeah. And that's where the IR firms come in, because they'll kind of get in and they'll be able to do that. They'll be able to say, like, you guys are so messed up. You didn't have any logging enabled anywhere. Like, we can't tell right now. Right. It really depends on what happens in that first phase. And it comes back to kind of getting ready for the attack and what kind of security practice you have. In some places, we could see people can figure out, throw in a tool and say, guess what? They came in here. We know we're good to go. Other times they might not find it just because there was never. They
came in, they went out before you even knew. Or nothing
never
was
under it.
We didn't, we didn't have logging on or whatever, or they turned something off or.
Logging is a beautiful thing, and also a system to get those logs off-prem.
Yeah, that's what people forget about. Who cares about the logs? Whatever, they're logs. No, you're going to care about the logs someday, I promise you.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's something as simple of making sure that the logs are represented as text somewhere that is then backed up by the backup system so that you can restore all of them, that's basic. But there are systems that you can buy that will just automatically exfiltrate all of those logs for you. Yeah.
I want to go back to a point you made earlier, Melissa, about sort of, how do you make sure that you fix the things that broke so everyone isn't like, hey, my VMs are back up. I don't need to worry about these things anymore. Have you heard any cases where, I know sometimes executives have sort of financial liability, right?
I've heard of that trend, right? Guess what? Your bonus is tied to if you get ransomware or not and how you recover it and stuff like that. That's starting to happen in some places. But a lot of it comes down to maybe the processes were never clearly defined up front, right? And that's where a lot of the cyber insurance stuff can actually come in and help. Well, they'll be like, you need to show us your response process. Yeah. And they'll be like, here you go. And they're like, okay, so where's the rest of it? Or something like that, right? What happened?
Where's the rest of it?
This is it? Here's a page. It's not going to work. And again, it comes back to the old school DR test. There needs to be ransomware recovery tests and postmortems of that ransomware recovery test, right? Y'all need to get in a room and figure out what worked, what didn't work.
Having done the old school DR test, I'm curious as to how they do a ransomware recovery test, because one of the hardest parts of a ransomware recovery is that the attacker they're still attacking. With the DR, you just say, okay, those 6 systems are dead.
So so here's where it gets complicated. Right. You need to test multiple types of recoveries, right? So maybe I'm recovering. Please, I can't even. I will vomit in my mouth if I say maybe I'm recovering in place. I can't even say that. So we're not going to say that. But maybe I'm going to my second site. Maybe I'm going to a warm site. Maybe I'm going to a hot site. Maybe I'm going to a public cloud. Maybe I'm going to a VMware cloud. You got to test all those, right? Because you don't know where you're going until that incident response phase starts, especially when law enforcement gets involved, right? So let's say stuff's really bad. The FBI comes and guess what? We are quarantining your whole data center while we investigate. Then what do you do?
You're down for business otherwise.
What do you do? No, you go to public cloud. You go to a service provider. You go someplace else. So you have to have all that ironed out ahead of time. You have to know that there's different considerations for recovery from a ransomware attack than a traditional disaster. So I guess, from a traditional disaster, what if the zombies eat both data centers, right? Then you would still need to go to the cloud or whatever.
But people probably aren't thinking about that though, right? The fact maybe the FBI will come quarantine, right? No. Do you have your backups offsite? Do you have it in some place that you can bring it up? And like you mentioned earlier, Melissa, it's things you should plan for ahead of time before you get to the point where you are trying to recover from ransomware.
Exactly. And again, unless an organization, so I have a couple of examples of, I don't want to say DR done wrong, but I worked for a company when I was an intern on Wall Street, and everything was in New York City, and 9/11 happened, and they were a block from the World Trade Center. That's what they couldn't do anything. They were done, right? They were just done. So they rebuilt their systems in a hotel room someplace, right? And that kicked off a huge project to say we actually need a second data center and it needs to be not around here, right? I'm also on the East Coast, right? So New York, Hurricane Sandy, we had this hurricane roll through. And again, like the data centers are like 20 miles from each other. Guess what? They both tanked.
Right.
So things like that. So until an organization actually has something happen to them, it's really, and here's the issue, the difference between disaster recovery and ransomware recovery when we talk about it. Traditional disaster recovery stuff, until it happens, it's easy to accept the risk, right? Well, you know what? It's cheaper for us to just like recover from this disaster and be down for 2 weeks than it is to actually put everything in a place where we build a second site, yada, 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 et cetera. That's because the risk is so low, right? And there's all kinds of equations for this in, cybersecurity and stuff like that. But when you change it to ransomware, the risk is it's going to happen. Like a probability of 1, it will happen. And that's what people don't understand. Like this is going to happen. It's not like you can say like, well, we haven't had 100-year storm ever, so we'll be fine. It's different like that. And a lot of people, I've actually seen a huge uptick in people getting ready. I don't think a lot of people are where they need to be. But I think as people get ready and it gets harder and harder to attack people because they've put like some semblance of security in it, right? You're going to go for the low hanging fruit. You're going to see the people who aren't ready get hit harder, and you're just going to see more and more attacks. And the threat actors are going to have to get more creative.
So here's a question for you. Normally, when we think about backup and recovery, right, it's always about restoring your data or your application because there might be a hardware failure, an application fault, user error, etc. Sometimes people talk about ransomware in the same context as disaster recovery and sort of those hardware.
Ransomware is a disaster. I should have trademarked that.
But here's the question, though, Melissa, is like you had just mentioned, it's not the same as a flood or a hurricane or something like that. And so are we kind of pushing ourselves and kind of giving people the false impression that it is similar to those other disasters?
No, I don't think so.
Things that they shouldn't worry about versus we should be treating it similar to like an application failure or a user failure and treating it similar. It's like more towards that side of the spectrum than this side.
And, that all falls under DR anyway, like hardware failure and all that kind of stuff. And again, in a lot of those cases, it's easy to say, well, I don't really want a second site. It's just cheaper to deal with the hardware. We'll rush order. I was in a situation at a company. We'll just rush order a new array from EMC. That will solve our problems. Like that was the plan and that happened. So crazy stuff like that. But the problem, why I like to make the analogy so much is the problem is when you tell someone that you have to get ready to recover from ransomware, they're just like, I don't know what to do. You have to put it in some context that kind of makes sense. I mean, disaster recovery is definitely like not sexy, even though I've done it most of my career. But it's something that everybody has an inkling about, at least, right? Everybody kind of knows that there is usually a DR test once or twice a year at a minimum.
Right.
So it's a starting point, right? It's not your final destination, but it's a starting point. It's a start context. Maybe you have some playbooks, some processes that we can leverage to go build on top of it and say, okay, so how do we make sure that we can recover now under any scenario?
I like to say that it's a subset, right? A DR is a subset of a ransomware recovery, but there's so much else, right? And the big thing, and I think you said it already, Prasanna, but the big thing to me, the difference between a DR and a ransomware attack is that the disaster isn't over. you're still.
I like that. The disaster never
When
ends.
a flood is gone, you're like, okay, all these servers got wiped out, so those are the ones
because
we
the threat
restore.
is still there. Just because you recover from the ransomware attack doesn't mean they're not going to hit you again, or someone else isn't going to hit you.
Right. Well, and how do you even know?
They're gone.
Like when a hurricane wipes out a data center, you're like, okay, those are the servers we need to restore. But when you walk into your data center and there's a ransomware attack going on, how do you even know which servers have been affected or not affected? Right. That is a big part of it.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is even like you might see the active infection, like things are being encrypted, et cetera, but it might just be lying silently, right? We've talked about dwell time in the past, right? Where it's just kind of waiting.
They just chill in there for a while. Like who knows? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I remember reading like a big name breach or something like that, or a big name attack, and they said they were in the network for like 6 months or something.
I think SolarWinds was like that.
It? I don't remember, but I remember reading a couple of them where they've been in there a significant period of time, and who knows what they're doing in there, right? Like who knows? Unless you catch them. So it's about catching them.
Yeah, the mean time is something like 60 days. Actually, is what I read.
I'd be the worst ransomware person. I'd be like, I'm in, let's go. It's like, no, you're not supposed to do that. You got to take your time and traverse through the network and get AD. I'd be like, let's go encrypt VMware, let's go. I'd be caught so fast. Or maybe I wouldn't.
You're only caught if someone's monitoring and watching, right, Melissa?
Right. And you need to be looking for the right things.
Yeah, as soon as you encrypt a VM, you're going to set off alarm or two. But I think you can encrypt. I think you can encrypt a lot of files that no one's looking at, right? But the moment you start encrypting,
once you hit the thing, VMs. The only thing is hopefully you'll be caught as soon as you start encrypting the VMs. You do them all at once, so it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, right. Because I
got all of them. It doesn't matter that you caught me doing the first one. I did them all. But yeah, so generally they're in there wreaking havoc, maybe exfiltrating data, doing some stuff before they go encryption happy. Or maybe like I've heard of cases recently where they don't even bother like encrypting stuff. They're just stealing data at this point. Be like, by the way, look what we have.
Is that easier, by the way, to steal data? Because it seems that you can sort of fly under the radar if you just steal data, because people will probably, maybe they notice, maybe they don't, but it's not as obvious as, say,
it's definitely not as obvious as encrypting stuff. I'm like this weird monitoring nerd too. I had like this monitoring fetish at Veeam. It was very strange. So like I would like really hone in on like what to look for to catch that too, right? But not everybody is crazy like me.
Right.
Network monitoring, right? You should be able to get them.
I do. To answer your question, Prasanna, I do think that exfiltration as an overall process is easier in that if you can get any data out, there's a much higher chance that they will respond, that they will pay the ransom, right? Because backups aren't going to help.
I'm looking at my black hat over there. I'm wondering if I should like put it on for this discussion or something. You would probably see. Like, all right, like if I'm a bad person, I'm not a bad person, I'm a good person. Like they start small, right? They grab a file here and there and they see if they get caught.
If anyone notices,
grab that, right? Like you don't go and just be like, oh, look, here's the file share of 25 million gigabytes of MP3s. I'm going to take it all at once. No, they're like picky and choosy. They try to find the sensitive data. They take a little bit here and there. Maybe they only need to grab a couple spreadsheets, right? It's not like, I think there's this misnomer that like they get in there and I'm just going to start downloading massive chunks of data.
Well, that's the whole point of the.
So you could exfiltrate a VM, just like download the VMDK and be like, hey, I got your whole.
Exactly.
Have a nice life.
But that's that whole phase of the initial phase of an attack is trying to expand out, seeing what you can find out.
Exactly.
Seeing if you can find a spreadsheet called customer database.xls, right?
And if you can, you might not bother encrypting everything. But if you can't find much, you say, all right, I'll steal some stuff and tell them I have some files, but I won't tell them what. And I'll hope that'll make them pay. And I'll just go, encrypt some stuff while I'm at it. Yeah. Which is more illegal? Is one more illegal than the other?
I think they both are pretty bad, right?
Is one more illegal than the other?
Well, they're both extortion.
Yeah.
The act of
stealing
data is one thing.
Stealing it, right?
Yeah, that's going to depend on where this happens. Whether or not exfiltrating the data is a different crime than damaging the data. But the extortion happens on both sides, right? And that's definitely illegal in pretty much every jurisdiction out
legal,
there.
Kids.
Don't try this at home.
So we talked about incident response. You've now been hit by a ransomware attack let's just take VMware environments, right? So what do you see people doing? Like, or what are things that they should be doing that they're not? Like, how do they even approach this, right?
So
your VMware environment gets encrypted. Now what?
To me, it's trash. I would throw it away and start over. Like, I'm not even joking. Throw it away, start over. It's trash.
And how much? And how much would you, when you say throw it away, are you talking about throwing away the virtual machines, throwing away the ESXi servers,
wipe the host, wipe the storage array, wipe it all, and start over? And here's the thing, right? So, like, I like it. I have this weird side of me that it also does like weird blogging stuff, right? And I like SEO and stuff like that. And even in my career at Veeam, people are like, how do I back up my VMware host? I'm like, you don't. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you don't. You automate the build process and the configuration, right? You don't actually back up your host and restore it. You just rebuild the whole thing. It's a clean install and you configure it. So that's what people need to be testing too, is how I would actually recover is almost a misnomer because personally I would trash it. How do I rapidly rebuild a VMware environment? And that's something that people don't do every day, right? Like that stuff runs. Like you might have not even reinstalled. You could have just been upgrading for the last like 10 years and like whatever. Probably not 10, probably 4 or 5 years you'll get a new host. I don't know. It depends. So that's something that people don't practice and don't do. And you can actually do that all for the most part in a nested virtualization environment, get all your processes down stuff. So it's a pretty low, I mean, you should test on your physical hardware at some point for any drivers and stuff, but it's actually a relatively low cost and effort thing to figure out. It's not rocket science.
But when you do this testing, wouldn't you also want to involve, say, like your networking team, your storage
yes, you would
team,
want to, any of this testing,
team?
You want to involve everybody, right? Everybody should be involved in this testing. Everybody. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems we see, that they're not.
So when you say
busy, they're like, I don't have time to do this.
When you say rebuild the VMware environment, obviously you're talking about wiping the hosts and the storage and all of that. When we get to the phase of actually bringing back VMs, what way would you do that?
So most backup software these days have something built in where it'll actually scan for ransomware as you're restoring, right? And find the ransomware if it's there. Because at that point, you know what you're infected with, so you know what to look for. So I would be either scanning it or, if you have really good, and then you can decide how you're going to fix it, or you're just going to go back to an earlier point or whatever. Some people are really good with the IR stuff to say, we know the ransomware came in this date, this time. We are absolutely 1,000,000% certain because we have all these logs. Go back to the last known good restore point, right? So it really depends. But the backup people are going to be a big part of that, right? Because it's going to be what tooling do you have and what capabilities do they have built in.
This is something I put a lot of thought into lately, of if the mean time of a infection is 60 days, and some of them are twice that. The idea of saying, we got infected December 1st, so we're going to restore to December 1st. That's a non-starter.
It doesn't always work. In some cases it might, in some cases it won't. And then you're going back to scanning.
So you've got to, I think in most cases, if not most cases, you're going to do a restore and scan.
Yeah. I've seen kind of almost like 2-stage recoveries too, like get the bare minimum of stuff, something online up and running, right? To restore services, and then do the full recovery later. So, you might be like, all right, so you know what? We can roll these servers back to December 29th. We can use the newest copy of the database. We can mash it together and make it work and serve our customers while we're actually restoring everything the right way.
Rack space.
So it depends.
Sorry. Yeah, it's what I thought of when you as soon as she said that. I know. Yeah, just make sure. Unlike Rackspace, just make sure that you thought of this beforehand, right? The only way that this is going to work is if you identify what are the 3 services that need to be up right away so that we can function as a company, and what are the other 20, 50, 100 services that
that ties almost more into like the business BCDR get lumped together a lot. That's almost like the business continuity. So like, what are our key applications and what level of what do we have to do to get those online first? Comes back to our RPOs and RTOs, right? It's such a big discussion that unless you've had it cross-functionally with the business owners and the app owners and the infrastructure owners and the security team, you're not in a good place.
Yeah, I think it's one thing to have a discussion, again, going to DR versus RR, is that it's one thing to go, well, what are the servers we're going to do first, and what are the servers that we're going to do 3 hours later?
Yeah.
It's a whole other thing to say, what are the servers we're going to do the first couple of days, and what are the servers we're going to do next week, right? I think
that's the problem, right? You don't know until it happens. Like if it's your whole environment is done, right? That is very different than, we know they just did this subset of servers or whatever. The company, I worked for a company that I no longer worked there. It was I was a customer, and they had they were one of the first really, really big ransomware attacks in the news. And it was like a disaster. I was like, wow, I'm glad I'm not on the VMware team anymore there when this is going down. Right. But it really depends, and you don't know what's going to happen. The only thing you can do is be as prepared as possible, right? Test different recovery methods. And I love RPOs and RTOs and saying that we can meet them under a testing scenario, but in the real world, we don't know that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
One of the things on the podcast we talked about a couple days ago was like Tom was mentioning, oh yeah, you just shut down your network and you start figuring out, okay, what was affected. You you prevent everything from going in and out. And I was like, but how do you communicate, right? And he's like, yeah, make sure you have ahead of time, sort of use cell phones. iMessage can work. You can set up a separate Slack instance completely outside of the corporate environment, right? Whatever it is to keep that ongoing communications going.
Can you imagine, like, how am I supposed to use Microsoft Teams to communicate with a security team? Well, that might be Office 365. That might be okay. It's a bad example.
Yeah, as long as you have an internet connection, right?
Yeah, which
is pretty easy to get these days.
But like, who has people's phone numbers these days?
People with incident response plans. That's who.
Yeah, that's true.
But aren't there issues though where ransomware actors might still have access to your Slack instance and be monitoring what's going on from an incident response?
I've seen that happen where like they still had access. It was Teams, I think. They still had access. They were watching the IR stuff happen as they were still in there hanging out. It's like, again,
this ransomware stuff is bad, Melissa. I'm just going to take that stance.
It's bad, and you don't know what's going to happen until it happens, which is why, and it ties back to incident response, right? And having an incident response firm on retainer that does this every day, right? Because I don't care how good, even if, like, okay, let's say you drop Melissa into XYZ company and you put her in charge, right?
Are you going to rappel down a rope from a helicopter? Because that would be
I'm going to rappel down a rope from a helicopter, drop me in, right? And say, Melissa, get ready for ransomware. And 6 months later, you hit me. I would like to say that I'll be able to recover, but I don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that. It doesn't matter how good you are. You're not doing this every day, right? Like, so unless you're doing this every day, because every attack is different, it's going to be like, what have these people seen in the other events? What ransomware gang have you been hit by, right? So I can put everything into place that I think I will need to make sure that we recover. And honestly, we'd probably recover all our data. I don't know if we would need our RPOs and RTOs. I'm pretty sure I could get all the data to the recoverable point. But what was exfiltrated, how did they get in, all that kind of stuff. You don't know, which is why you have to call the pros. You have to call the people that do this every day.
Is there sort of a standard ransomware recovery test? But like that kind of outlines like, hey, here are the things, because I can imagine, say you can't afford the pros. Say you can't afford the pros, right? Mm-hmm. Is there sort of here are the testing scenarios you should be thinking about, or here are the things that sort of get shot in the head when a ransomware recovery
I kind of thought about
ransomware
doing something like that. Google tabletop exercises, like ransomware recovery, disaster recovery tabletop exercises, right? That's a good place to start. I've thought about doing like a Dungeons and Dragons style type, like ransomware recovery.
Yeah, with the actual people. Yeah, with like you get the networking security.
I think that would be fun and useful. And you know what? When you make things fun, people actually pay attention.
Yeah.
Right. So like if I get you all into and be like, today we are going to talk about ransomware recovery and have a mock simulation of what would happen. Be like, okay, you're a paladin, you're a warrior, you're a mage. An adult black dragon just showed up and encrypted your VMs. What are you doing? Yeah. Right? Like you're going to have so much fun. You're going to remember it and it's going to work out a lot better.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. By the way, one of the things, we talked a lot about prepping. One of the things that I think also, in terms of, we talked about exfiltration monitoring. I also like the idea, and we talked about it on a couple of different episodes, this idea of something on your DNS side that would notice when you start talking to really weird domain names.
Yeah, right? That's a big one. And there's all these lists. A lot of these researchers will just like tweet like, by the way, domain's looking a little hot, a little sus. You might want to block that stuff. So there's these lists of these like known bad domains and IPs and stuff like that too.
Right. Yeah. And the other, but I do think that if you implement exfiltration monitoring, if you have a specific exfiltration monitoring, I think you could stop or notice it quickly and stop it. But what I'm hearing from others is that not everybody can afford such a thing, right?
No. A lot of people can't afford it, or they don't have the skill set to build it themselves. Yeah. And do you really want to be building and maintaining your own security systems? Probably not.
No, but a lot of people do, right?
Yeah, because they have no choice. It's better than nothing. Like I've done some weird stuff with some weird software because it was better than nothing. It's really a difficult point to be in, and it's kind of like, you know, all these people put out these security companies will do all this research of like, here's the top ways they're getting in and blah 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 and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of marketing that goes into it, but there's a lot of truth, right? So like I think the big thing was the people for a long time. The people let it in, you know, where was it? When this whole Cisco thing happened, that was like MFA, right? They got in through their MFA because they kept spamming them. Eventually they said yes, because MFA, like, stop calling me at 11 o'clock at night. Now they're saying, oh, it's more vulnerabilities than people, right? So honestly, I feel like the people might be easier to deal with than the vulnerabilities. I don't know. Because then it's going to be like testing the patches. Can we patch everything? Can we remediate everything? It's just like, what are the areas that you can find within your own organization to be quick wins, because you want to prove that you can win to your management so you get more money and can do more projects. So you need like a balance of quick wins to prove progress and high impact, right? What are the things that I can implement that will have the most impact to reduce the risk? And you're never going to get the risk to zero. There's a lot of people say that like assume breach, right? Like assume they're going to get in. So we can do all this security stuff. We can do all this backup, and backup is basically assuming they're going to get in. Right? Like we're not backing this stuff up because we think our security is so great. Like we're assuming that it's the last line of defense. We're going to need it. So a lot of it is just trying to mitigate what you can in a way that makes sense for your organization, because we can't have everybody working 20-hour days doing this either, or they're going to be too fried to make mistakes, and people are a problem. It's difficult. It really is hard for any organization. It's what can I do with what resources I have, and CYA, right? I'd probably be doing a lot of CYA when, you know, they tell you it's too expensive and you can't do that. Well, you better have that documented. So when you get ransomware, not like, Melissa, why didn't you put in that security system? You told me we didn't have the money.
You don't know what's the current hot way that they're going to attack you. You can't stop all vulnerabilities. You can't stop all stupid user things that stupid users are going to do. And so I do think you have to assume breach, right? And so you do have to do some things in your network that are going to tell you when the bad guys are here, and that we stop it as quickly as we can.
Can we make a movie about this, please?
It'll be
like
boring.
Ransomware?
It'll only be exciting to IT people.
I'm going to have ChatGPT write me a movie. I've had to write me ransomware Hallmark movies. I kid you not. I'm just saying. Have to entertain myself somehow.
My wife would watch it if we make it a K-drama. Make it a Korean drama.
Ooh, that would be good. Or like a Bollywood ransomware story.
Yeah. There was a ransomware attack in a K-drama that, I don't know if you saw it. There's one called Startup.
No, but now I have to.
There's a really big incubator in Korea in this movie. And this group of people, they do a startup there. And right at the crucial moment, they get a ransomware attack, and it was because some people did some dumb stuff. Movies. They cut some corners, you know, and so they got a ransomware attack. And the tech wasn't bad, right? I've actually seen a lot of. There was The Good Doctor. That's the one with the guy that he's on the spectrum. Anyway,
they got a ransomware episode too.
They got a ransomware attack.
Grey's Anatomy did one.
Grey's Anatomy did one. The Good Doctor did one, and the tech wasn't bad, right? I just hate it when it's like when you watch. I don't know if you ever watched. Did you ever watch The Net?
Yeah.
That tech was bad.
All I know is I don't know. Maybe there's some Hallmark movies going on in my house. And it was on in the other room when I was cooking dinner, and my ears perked up because I heard something about an engineer, and it was the dude who was the engineer. I was like, oh, I had hopes for this one. So Hallmark, if you are listening to this, I would love to be your female lead in a ransomware movie. I think that would be so much fun. Come on. Happy ending. The
question is, how can you incorporate a small town with a business that's, you know, on its last legs, and then maybe
that would work.
Instead of a big bookstore coming into town to shut down your little bookstore, it's the ransomware attack shuts down the little bookstore in the small
or it
town.
could be a doctor's office.
Yeah.
Right?
Or local hospital. We could do local hospital. That would be fine.
Yeah.
Small town hospital. Only thing for miles.
Exactly.
It's the big city girl that knows about ransomware to rescue the little small
big
town.
City girl leaves her job at a software company, goes back to her hometown to go out on her own. Just saying.
This can stuff you tell I've seen a Hallmark movie or show?
It's my guilty pleasure. I'm just going to say that around Christmas, there was a thing going around. It was like Hallmark movie generator. And I looked at it and I went, this is my life. Oh my goodness. I'm a Hallmark movie. This is so cool.
They are kind of predictable as storylines, but yet they've yet to have a ransomware attack.
Come on.
I'm behind
Disappointing.
that. Yeah. Well, on that note, speaking of disappointing, I hope you folks like this episode.
I hope I wasn't a giant disappointment.
I think this was a good episode.
Yeah.
And I think, we covered a lot. We also had a little bit of fun. I love that. That's actually my favorite kind of episode where if it's just straight talk the whole time, it's boring. This was good, good smattering of both. So I think the one thing we're getting away from this is the best way to respond to a ransomware attack is to respond to it before it happens.
Yes.
Right. Talk to people, talk to a incident response team. A cyber insurance company is a good way to get one of those. Do all the ransomware recovery scenarios, right? All the different scenarios from the backup and recovery standpoint, right? And do some kind of monitoring, logging out, right? Saving your logs, getting the logs, logging. I can't say that. I can't say it that quickly. Yeah, logging. I don't know. My tongue doesn't do that. Anyway, and then also some kind of monitoring for what's going on in your environment that would set off alarms when a ransomware, initial phase is happening. Because that's the key to stopping it is to stop it.
Yeah, get it fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
And thanks, Prasanna, despite the fact that you were the cause of all of our technical problems.
I'm sorry. Hopefully not anymore.
Sounds like a Hallmark movie. Just saying.
Thanks, Curtis. And enjoy your vacation, Curtis. And thanks, Melissa, for joining us again.
My pleasure.
We want to say thank you to our listeners as well. It's been a great year, 2023. So I hope you enjoyed this repeat episode that was so popular earlier in the year. And again, we just want to thank you. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.